It is day 23 of the journey towards leaving the US, and I've had a chance to reflect on the Grand Canyon. The things I learned from that were not what I expected. So first of all, I have had so many nightmares since I came back. And I asked a friend of mine, I was like, why do you think I'm having all these nightmares all of a sudden? And she said,
it sounds like you going to the Grand Canyon was kind of a milestone in your mind of, okay, this is the beginning of you leaving. And I think what happened was going to the Grand Canyon solidified in your mind that you're leaving, because that's your final act of, this is what you wanted to do in Arizona. And now you're kind of purging all of these thoughts and feelings and everything that you haven't necessarily worked through, or you have worked through, but they're not totally resolved or whatever from the US.
And I think she's totally right. I think it's kind of like my life flashing before my eyes before I leave, because leaving is a death in a way, right? So, and the nightmares are very much things that I'm processing, things that I'm working through. They went from old crazy memories and old people that I haven't talked to in years, sometimes decades, showing up, to more productive, maybe not nightmares, but well, they're nightmares, but they're not as intense. They went from really intense to just like kind of analog horror, kind of like that just really creepy feeling that you get in your dreams where it's like surreal, but it's not terrifying. And now they're kind of just shifting more towards productive. So it's like now there's a productivity to them. They're highlighting, okay, this is what's working in your life, this is what isn't, and how to move forward. So I think she's totally right. I think I was processing all of that, and that was interesting. Another thing that I have worked through since coming back from the Grand Canyon is realizing that I can't live at altitude, at a high altitude. So I lived in Colorado Springs for 8.5 years, but I never understood that it was affecting me adversely because I drove there from the East Coast, which is a really gradual ascent to that altitude. When I did visit there briefly, it would be to fly there. So, that's going way up in altitude and then back down. So I never really noticed it. And then when I moved to Arizona, I still lived in northern Arizona, which can be anywhere between 5,000 to 7,000 feet above sea level. That's about 1,200 to 2,200 meters, give or take. So now where I live is 1,000 feet, or about 300 meters above sea level. Like, that's nothing compared to what I was living at. And Arizona, you can go within just 5 to 6 hours from 7,000 feet to 1,000 feet. So doing that trip, going from where I am now up to a high altitude in one day, and then the next day going from a high altitude back down to a low one, really highlighted how much the altitude affected me. Because first of all, at night, while I was trying to sleep at the higher altitude, I kept waking up super dehydrated. I just didn't feel right. My limbs felt heavy. I couldn't explain it. And I was like, what is wrong with me? And then I realized, oh, it's probably the altitude. That's the only thing that's really changed. I mean, besides the temperature, but it felt like altitude. I don't know how to explain how my brain just knew it was altitude, but I think that's just life experience. And then when I came back down, Moogie and I were both miserable while we were up there. I know part of it was the logging operation for her and her feeling like she couldn't go outside, but I think a huge part of it was the altitude for her too, because when we got back down to Phoenix, she started moving around the car. She perked right up. I felt lighter. I felt like I had more bounce in my step. I went from looking at the Grand Canyon and thinking, am I just like overwhelmed or am I depressed? I couldn't figure it out. I felt weird. I had brain fog. I felt like I couldn't process even the awe of the Grand Canyon the way I wanted to. And I was thinking, oh, well, maybe it's just the emotion of seeing this place. Maybe I'm just getting in touch with the fact that, you know, I'm going to have to leave Arizona, and I do love Arizona. This is one of the most geographically diverse states in the country, and it's just beautiful. Arizona is honestly beautiful. And I was just thinking, am I just depressed that I'm going to be leaving Arizona? And then I finally realized, yeah, that's probably part of it, but a huge part of it was the altitude. So it took me all this time and all these nights of nightmares. What was the Grand Canyon was day 10 and 11, and this is day 23, I said. It took me almost 2 weeks to process all of that and go through all the emotions and everything, and I think it maybe wouldn't have taken as long if I wasn't at that altitude. Didn't end up going to Painted Rocks. I also thought about it afterwards that it would have been really nice to see Lake Havasu, but I would have had to take so much time off to get to those places, because even though they're not far from each other geographically or like on a map or as a crow flies, getting to these places, because Arizona is actually not incredibly populated. It's actually very sparsely settled. Like each different town, each different area is kind of isolated from each other, which is why it's so cool. Which is why I love Arizona so much, is because it's so culturally diverse, because each area, each pocket kind of has its own culture, its own way of thinking, all of that. But what that also means is if you want to go from your little area, your little cultural bubble to another one, it might be close mileage wise, but actually getting there is super difficult because there's only a few ways in. There's usually a lot of traffic because there's only a few ways in. And usually like everyone else is trying to go there at the same days you are. Now it was cold when I went up to Flagstaff, so I didn't really have that problem, but still they're getting the areas around all of these towns can get really congested because people are trying to get in and out of just a few different routes to get in and out. Unless you want to just full-blown drive over the desert, or you're Daenerys Targaryen and you have dragons, you're gonna have to deal with all that. So I didn't end up going to Havasu or Painted Rocks, and that is fine. I've made peace with that. I kind of realized on the way back from the Grand Canyon that just the time, I lived in Sedona for 3 years, and just that time I think was enough to get acquainted with that area, with those lands, with the canyons and the way that they operate. And I didn't get a sense that, yes, the Grand Canyon is a totally different spirit, a totally different energy than the land of Sedona, but it's not so different that, you know, it just felt like visiting the cousin of Sedona. So I've kind of made peace with the fact that my time in Sedona has acquainted me with those lands and with those ancestors, and I'm okay with moving past that now. And I'm also okay with not going back up to that altitude because I don't want to feel like crap. So that's my Grand Canyon update. I will come back in a couple days. I'm going to be returning the rental car this week. You guys are awesome. Thank you for tuning in. Stay fabulous, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye.